Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 906B, and today's date is February 29th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Calm Before the Storm as Military Assets Are Moved into Place. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. A new poll was released today by the National Public Radio and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and they looked at Obamacare, and they wanted to know, did this benefit the people? How are people doing on Obamacare? And when they took the poll, they found out that only 15% of Americans say they have benefited from Obamacare, which is the Affordable Care Act. And we realize how this whole entire situation was created. Obamacare basically is not a benefit for the people. And we're seeing this as time goes on, that people are paying higher premiums, they're getting less benefits, and if you don't take this, you're taxed. So it's all for the benefit of the people. Now remember, the government exempted themselves from this, and they kept their own health insurance. So if Obamacare is supposed to be so great, wouldn't you think our leaders, the ones who are leading us, showing us, they would take it? But these aren't leaders. These people are in it for themselves. They're there to make money. They're not there to support the American people, to support the United States. They're there to pander to corporations, to central banks, to foreign governments. And we see right now everything that's being done today is not for the people, especially all this legislation where we're seeing more and more of our hard-earned money taken away from us, either through taxes or hidden taxes. And that's what Obamacare is, with very few benefits. And when we look at Obamacare, it was completely created to help the health insurance companies, and to help the government bring in revenue. That's it. Now, the US Marshal, they have been using the stingray surveillance, and they've been using this a lot. Now, what happened was USA Today ordered documents through the Freedom of Information Act. They requested a copy for the agency's log of cases in which agents had used the stingray devices. And by accident, they gave them the documentation showing that they've used this 6,000 times in 2015. And a lot of it, they didn't have warrants. Now we know the Department of Justice has now ordered federal agents to begin obtaining search warrants before using the stingrays, but we don't know if this is really happening, because before they felt we didn't need a warrant. We can just spy on you whenever we want. Well, yeah, you do. Look at the Fourth Amendment. And it seems like all these agencies, they do not abide by the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, or anything else. They're just doing whatever they want. And we know they're doing whatever they want because the Department of Justice wouldn't have to say, please get a warrant. And the only reason the Department of Justice said anything is because people complained, because people found out. If you notice, the government only reacts when people point things out. When they're left to their own, they do nothing. And this is why when Obama was being pressured about the NSA, which he did nothing about, by the way, all that talk, nothing happened. The NSA is still doing what they've always done through different channels. That's it. They're still spying on the American people. And the only problem now is encryption. They need to get rid of encryption so they have access to everything. And this is not to stop terrorists. This is to spy on every single person. Now, out in Ukraine, we see Ukraine is completely falling apart. Chaos is within the government. It's getting worse. Their currency is collapsing. IMF is finding it hard to keep Kiev funded. Yatsenyuk is out there. He's saying his government is under pressure from those seeking to get power. And really what he's talking about is the people are trying to push this puppet government out of power. They're sick and tired of the puppet government, which was placed in there by the United States. And we see things are starting to heat up in Ukraine. And it's only going to get worse as we move forward. Now, we know the United States is putting a lot of pressure on Iran still. Even though the P5+1 deal went through, sanctions were released, we see they're still making comments about Iran and their nuclear program. Remember, this has nothing to do with nukes. This has to do with the dollar, the central bank, their natural resources. And the reason why we're seeing pressure on Iran once again is because Iran said they're not going to be using the dollar for oil sales. They're going to be using the euro temporarily and then most likely move to yuan or ruble. And the U.S. cannot have this. And they're looking at their missile program, which do not have nukes on top of them. And Iran is saying, listen, we can develop our missile program. We don't need permission from anyone. It's for defense capabilities. And it's funny because this is what the U.S. always says. Well, Turkey is allowed to defend itself. Ukraine is allowed to defend itself. But when it comes to other countries that don't have a puppet government, they're not allowed to defend themselves. They talk out of two sides of their mouth. Now we see things rapidly ramping up in Libya right now. We see the U.S. is continually bombing inside of Libya. There were additional airstrikes and no group has taken responsibility. Most likely it is the U.S. because we know they're in there with special forces, with the French. We know that they've been hitting the Islamic State. We know the president was out there saying that, yes, we will be hitting the Islamic State, which we know that's not what they're hitting. They're hitting the people, the government that's in power in Tripoli, but they're making it look like they're going after the Islamic State. This is their cover story. But what's very interesting about all of this in Libya, and we know they're preparing to go into Libya. Now, they would like a unity government in there, so the unity government can invite them in. This is what they're pushing for. But if this does not work out, they're going to go in anyhow. So we're getting reports right now that the UK are going to be bringing in troops to Tunisia, which is on the border of Libya. So about 20 UK troops are being sent to Tunisia to help out with the border problems there because they're very nervous about the Islamic State coming across the border. No, I don't think that's what this is for. We're also seeing that the French nuclear-powered aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle is steaming through the Red Sea on its way to the Mediterranean via the Suez Canal for joint maneuvers with Egyptian Navy in preparation for a reduced coalition offensive against the Islamic State in Libya. And the Charles de Gaulle departed from the Persian Gulf on Monday, February 22nd, and it's due to reach the Mediterranean in the first week of March. Now, we are getting reports that there could be some type of an offensive in late April or May. Everything has been prepared. Everything is ready to go. They're waiting for the green light. Now, will this happen on this date? We'll have to wait and see. But we are getting reports that this is their go time. We're also seeing out in Iraq that U.S. forces are going to be playing a bigger role in the recapturing of Mosul. And we know that the U.S. is creating air bases and bringing in additional military assets into Iraq. And it looks like they're preparing for something much, much larger. Now, the U.S., they've come out with this warning in Iraq. And they're warning U.S. citizens to be ready to leave Iraq at a moment's notice. And actually, if you can leave now, leave. They're saying there could be a catastrophic collapse of the country's largest hydroelectric dam near Mosul. Iraqi officials are out there saying, no, the dam is absolutely fine. There's no problems with it. We see no structural problems. We don't know what the United States is talking about. But the U.S. is saying, listen, those towns downstream from the Tigris River, Tikrit, Baghdad, they could be, hit with a lot of water from this dam, and it could destroy a lot of things and people can die. Now, the question is the U.S. preparing to do something? Because we know Iraq, they are preparing and getting ready to go into Mosul and to get rid of the Islamic State. Now, we know the United States doesn't want this to happen. The Iraqi officials, the Iraqi army, went into Ramadi without the U.S. and cleared that area. Of course, the U.S. is saying, yes, we want this to happen, but in reality, they really don't. So what are they planning to do in this area? We'll have to watch that situation very, very carefully. Erdogan right now is saying that he will not allow a terrorist corridor in the north of Syria. And of course, he's referring to the PYD, Kurdistan Workers' Party, and the Syrian Kurdish Democratic Union Party. Now, what he's really saying is he's going to keep the corridor open for the Islamic State so they can move weapons in and out. And this is why they've been bombing Syria, to keep this area free. And of course, every time they come out with this idea that, someone else is using it for a terrorist operation, it's always the opposite. Now, we see the Syrian truce. It has been holding. When the truce started this past Saturday, Russia decided they weren't going to bomb any areas for 24 hours. And we see that they're going to resume bombing in all different areas. Now, the U.S. is out there, and they're saying they will continue bombing whoever they deem to be the Islamic State, which, of course, this is not what the U.S. is going to be bombing. They're going to be using the cover story that this is what they're bombing, because we know the Islamic State is the proxy army of the United States government central bankers. So why would they bomb their own proxy army? They wouldn't. That's why they haven't been doing it for the last year. What they'll be doing is trying to hit other infrastructure and other forces, maybe Assad's forces. And we can see that as time goes forward and Russia starts bombing, the U.S. starts bombing, who knows if this ceasefire is going to hold, because we already see fingers being pointed in both directions. We see the Free Syrian Army is saying that Assad's forces are violating the ceasefire. We see the opposite happening. And eventually what's going to happen is they're going to say, okay, the ceasefire is off. This is where we seem this is headed. But what's very interesting about all of this is we know the ceasefire is being used for a timeout. Russia's using it to stop the forces going after Assad, which is a good move, where they still can bomb the Islamic State. The United States, Turkey, the coalition forces, they're using it to rearm the Islamic State and the rebels and bring in humanitarian aid for them, because they're preparing for a major offensive. So defense ministers from the U.S.-led coalition discussed the possibility of Syrian ground incursion 2 weeks ago in Brussels. And they were deciding how many troops, how they will go and where they will go, who's going to participate, and they have drawn up a plan. Now, is Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the coalition forces just going to bring in ground troops? Well, this would be very suspicious of why these ground troops are basically invading a sovereign country. It makes no sense whatsoever. So, in the background of all this, what do we see happening? Well, we know in April, this is the time frame where Syria is going to have the parliamentary elections. We know the U.S. government, central bankers, the coalition forces, they really don't want this to happen because they know what's going to happen. The people are going to vote for Assad and Assad's party, and this wouldn't look good. Just like back in June of 2014, where Assad had elections, 87% or so of the people voted for him, And then, of course, 3-4 weeks later, we saw the Islamic State all of a sudden appear. So we know we have this time frame from now until probably May. And what's very interesting, this coincides with what they're going to do in Libya, where we're hearing that they're getting ready to go in between April and May. Very interesting. We have warnings in Lebanon. Now we know Israel is right next to Lebanon, which most likely they'll use their forces to get into Lebanon and clear the area out, because Lebanon borders on Syria. So we have Lebanon on the east coast. We have Iraq, where the U.S. is telling the U.S. citizens to get out of Iraq, and they're bringing in more forces, creating air bases and basically taking over some of the air bases there and building up the forces. We know the U.S. on the northern part with Turkey, they have basically fortified the borders. The U.S. has an air base inside of Syria, and Turkey has kept the corridor open for the Islamic State terrorists, which they support. We know that France and Egypt, their warships, are on their way to Libya. We know that the U.S. has brought in amphibious warships. We know the USS Harry Truman is also in the Mediterranean. We know the UK has brought in troops on the border of Tunisia. We know the French and the US and other coalition forces are already inside of Libya. We know that there are drills going on at the same time with the coalition forces. And just this past week, we know that there are tactical nukes being brought in, and we're getting word that one was transferred into Syria. So we have this ceasefire, and we have all of these other things occurring at the same time. And basically what this is telling us at this point, when we look at all these indicators, is something is being prepared. And right now what we're seeing is the calm before the storm. Everything being prepared, everything being readied. Having the world look at the ceasefire, saying, look, it's working. We have peace in the region. But it's impossible for the U.S. to keep this ceasefire going. Because if they do, Russia and the Syrian army will push the Islamic State out of Syria. That would mean the United States and the coalition forces, they have no reason to be in Syria. Actually, they have no reason to be in Syria right now. They've invaded a sovereign country they never asked permission. Russia has been invited into the country. Big difference here. It would be like Mexico coming in, or Canada coming into the United States saying, oh, we're just going after terrorists. Don't mind our bombing. Don't mind our troops. Don't mind that we took an air base here. So we can see at this point, they have this window right now. And they're preparing and getting ready. They're taking this time to prepare for what is coming. And we will see the Middle East, because we can see right now, it's going to light up. Their backs, the U.S. government, central bankers, the coalition forces, their backs are against the wall right now. They have no other alternative but to go full force and to really light things up here, because they're just not going to leave. Because if they just leave, the petrodollar collapses. The Middle East collapses. And when I say collapse, they're puppet governments. Not the people. The people will take their countries back, and they will take over the oil fields. They will sell the oil using whatever currency they want. And when this occurs, the entire system falls apart. Now, when the system falls apart, who do we blame? It's going to be completely recognizable who's at fault here. It's going to be the U.S. government and the central bankers, because they've been telling us that everything's fine. We're in a recovery. Nothing to worry about. And then all of a sudden, we have a collapse. They will not let this happen. They want this system to start over. They need a war so they can restart the system. And this is what they've been pushing for. and they've been pushing hard. Now, do all their plans work out? As we can see from the past, no, they do not. A lot of times other countries step in and their plans go down the drain. They reorganized, they come up with a new plan, but the goal, if you noticed, is always the same. So we're going to have to watch this situation very, very carefully. Because if it does not go as planned, if they cannot get this war started by having another country start it, they will use an event. They will use a false flag to make it look like another country or group has created this problem, to take all eyes off of the collapse. Now remember, the collapse is not going to stop. It's just going to be covered up by the war. There will be hard times here in the United States, throughout Europe, in Canada, in Australia, in England. It's just not going to go away. It will be a domino effect. But they're hoping with war comes printing of money or creating currency out of thin air, putting governments into further debt because the system operates in debt. And having people go off to war, this will cover up who created the problem. You'll be too busy fighting their war, and their war is about keeping their system alive. And at this point, this is when we have to say, we're not doing this. The people in the US, in Canada, Australia, Europe, UK have to say, you know what? We're not doing it this time. We don't believe you. We know this is your war. We know this is your system. We're taking it back right now. And we all have to come together at this point and say, the people are taking back their countries. The people are taking back their financial system. The people are putting those government officials, those banksters, behind bars. Just like Iceland did. They did the same exact thing. And their country is prospering. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.